It's the end of the season for pruning, and I'm going to be documenting what volunteers, with help from Stephen Scanniello, have done along the Broadway fence. The first rose we're looking at is Follette. It is a hybrid gigantea, and yes, it is a giant. We let it go as far to the east as it wants because there's no plants in its way. To the west, it collides with another hybrid gigantea, which is Lijiang Road Climber. So we try to keep it from taking over the turf of its neighboring rows. You can see that a lot of old canes have been taken out. Other new ones have been tipped and tied in, which is what Terry's in the process of doing on Lijiang Road Climber. We had it cut back quite a bit by some AmeriCorps volunteers earlier this year. Now we're taking out big old canes and weak canes and rejoicing in the number of brand new canes. If you see the stout red canes on this rose, this is one heck of a vigorous plant and has produced a lot of new growth this year. This rose is not that old. It's been here maybe 5 years, 6 years. So it's established itself incredibly. The next rose, which right now has growing on either side of it, its neighboring roses, is a modern rose. It's Rusty's Angels Camp Orange. Some believe it's Royal Sunset. Totally different type of rose in that it's a repeat blooming, large flowered climber with a lot of hybrid tea in its background. And so what we've done, because it is a brand new plant, we planted it last year, has been just tipped it a little bit and encourage it to grow towards the fence. The next rose is yet again a completely different kind of rose. This is Lady Fingers. We believe it's a hybrid Witcherana. Was collected up at Empire Mine and has not been identified. We've cut out many of the old canes and trained the new ones across the fence, again tipping every lateral. Unlike some of the other types of roses, such as Rusty's Angels Camp Orange, this grows with a plethora of new canes at the base. So what you do is very much like you would do with raspberries. You cut out the old, train in the new, and let it grow and bloom another year. This is how Volcano Plot, maybe Howley. It's from a cemetery, I believe, up in Volcano, the Howell plot. And this one's probably a hybrid sempervirens, so it too grows from the base, but not as much, and grows with a different growth habit. One of the fascinating things for me along the fence is all the different types of roses we have. We have an empty spot here. We do have a rose that Fred Botine has donated to us to put in this spot. But another hybrid gigantea is heading its way in both directions. This is Belle Portuguese, often found in the old places in the gold country, a magnificent rose in bloom. But you'll notice, as I was saying, this one doesn't send out much new growth from the base. And so what we have from this is that most of the new canes come up out higher on the rose. Easley's Golden Rambler in the 2015 video that we had was spectacular. And it's been declining for years. We have crown gall in our garden. Never have spotted it on this rose, but it does make me wonder just why it's so emphatically in decline. We have tried painting some of the canes because we know that this exposed sandy spot The canes get a lot of wind, they get southern exposure. The fence runs east and west, so we have tried putting some dilute latex paint on the canes to protect them. We've cut out dead, fertilized, tried to water, although that's been a difficulty because we've had problems with the irrigation system up here. And still the rose is going downhill. This is a good candidate for us to try to propagate if indeed we decide we want to keep it in our collection. However, next to it is a rose that's doing great. This is car wash rose. It's been lost from its site on the car wash in San Andreas, has never been identified, might be a descendant of Rev d'Or. It's like a Rev d'Or with less petals. We believed for years that this was a once blooming rose until we started trimming it, fertilizing it, and watering it 3 times a week, which is necessary in the sandy soil, and it's rewarded us by being in bloom, at least a few scattered flowers throughout the growing season from spring well into fall. We're very proud of this rose and love it a bunch. The next rose is Ramona, and you can see it's white canes. These are not aged canes, these are painted canes. You can see the red ones that are brand new, but the ones that are gray are either old gray wood or they have been painted. This was pruned by Stephen Scanniello, and we really hope that it's allowed to stay like this so we can see how it's been done. Next rose is another newer rose to us. It's one that Tom Liggett donated on rootstock. It is considered a true climbing Lady Hillingdon, and as such it's so new that we haven't done much with it. We believe that the first few years you let a rose grow. We've done a lot of cutback on Castro Green Musk Climber. We again have lost some of the older canes. I think that this setting's been hard on it. We'll see how it blooms and grows this year. I would sure prefer to see some larger trunks at the base of this rose, but when the folks got to working on it, this is all they felt that they had left. The next rose is Peggy Martin, and Peggy is such a vigorous rose, such a rewarding thing to grow, and we expect a very beautiful spring growth. I'm a little worried about it because a couple of the canes are getting old, beginning to have sunburn and borer damage. And one of the newest canes was damaged by weed eaters by Sheriff's Work Project this summer. I've always tried to keep the weed eaters away from the base of the roses, but in fact, I'll get a close-up so you can see what weed eater damage looks like. There you can see it. There's some leaves in front. Let me move them aside. But that's weed eater. And what happens is it girdles the canes, and it can kick up dirt that makes a plant susceptible to crown gall. So we really would way prefer to keep weed eaters away from the base of our roses. This is Dr. Rouge. This is a climbing tea. You don't see many climbing teas. It too has white paint on it to try to protect it. Terry did a lot of cleanup, but many of the canes are thin on this. We'll see how it does. In its peak bloom, it can be truly beautiful. The next rose is Barfield White Climber. This rose was one found by John Starnes, and it's a true wonder of a vigorous, thornless, repeat blooming rose. We grow it and think of John. It may have some air shear in the background, or it may be related to the multiflora rambler Towson shown. We've never really figured out what it is. I've actually got to read the label on this one to be reminded. And indeed, it's another climbing tea. Forgot that we put this up here. We've had some replacements of roses that were growing in these next two spots. And this is Florence Bauer's Pink Tea, a wonderful climbing tea rose. We had it on a support elsewhere in the garden. The supports have been very difficult for the city to accept, and they really, for this rose, it was difficult to maintain. It truly is easier to maintain a rose espaliered on a fence, so here we have it. The next rose is Greenmount Cemetery Rose, and it is from the East Coast, is probably not a true climber. I believe it's more of a China rose. Reminds me really of Fellenberg and how it grows, and it's a pillar type China rose. And as such, I would prefer to grow it elsewhere rather than on the fence. But we do like having repeat blooming roses here, and this one is very colorful, very mannerly. You can keep it to a controlled space, unlike so many of the other roses, and so we've allowed it to be here. Once we figured out it wasn't really a climber, it still is just a workhorse of a little rose. Very nice rose. The last one in the corner is Mosier House Shed Rose. This rose has had about half of its volume removed. It's still a mammoth rose. It is probably a hybrid Citidris, which is found in the Mokelumne Hill area at the Mosier House. And there is a picture on Help Me Find of this rose covering the shed where it grew. And I believe it's actually still there today. We'll have it covered in pale pink flowers in the spring, and it is one of the last roses to bloom. So in this area we have one of the first to bloom, which is Ramona, as well as one of the last. We have about a 2-month display of climbing roses in 18 spots along a fence here on Broadway.